Welcome to our February legislative breakfast. It's hard to believe that it's February already. The legislators have been hard at work this week. There's a lot going on in Jeff City, and you'll see that when you see our weekly legislative updates. Our program today is going to feature an overview of the Economic Development Consensus Agenda, and then we have an opportunity to, unfortunately it's virtually, but meet our newly elected senators and representatives. So we're excited to have them join us today. At this time, I would like to introduce Zach Sweets. Most of you know Zach, but he's the Community Business Manager at Evergy, and he also chairs the Grandview and South Kansas City Chambers Government Affairs Committee. So good morning, Zach. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having me. And here we are again. I really enjoy these Fridays to first off get everybody together, but also just to have these conversations. And one of the first conversations we're going to have today is we're going to hear from Jim Erickson, and then we'll go on to the rest of our agenda as Vicki said, to introduce and hear from our new elected officials down in Jeff City. And I excuse my clock in the background. But Jim is a Kansas City native with a degree from the University of Kansas and a master's degree from Pitt State. And Jim began his career in politics and as an economic analyst overseas in Thailand, South Africa, and Egypt. And upon moving back to Kansas City in 2015, Jim has been working in economic development, both with the EDC of Kansas City and also the Kansas City Area Development Council, also known as KCADC, not just a mouthful, but a lot of letters. But Jim currently leads the government affairs and also oversees the Office of Industry Initiatives and Entrepreneurship at the EDC of Kansas City, Missouri. So he was with the KCADC, now he's back with the EDC of Kansas City and his government affairs role. And most importantly, what Jim wants you to know before he gets going to kind of talk about the consensus agenda is that he sees the Chiefs winning this weekend, winning the Super Bowl 34-21. I told him that was a little close for my liking, but if that's what our final score will be, then I guess Jim hit it right on the nose. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. You know, my heart was saying 37-21, but I thought I'd be a little bit more professional and dial it down just to 34. So that's where that came in. Thank you all for having me this morning. And after doing this a couple times, I think it's best to start off with addressing my background. I am not, in fact, in a bathroom. A couple people have asked that when I've done presentations. This is one of our nice EDC focus rooms, so I'll get that out of the way immediately. I had intended on making this a 20-minute discussion on Chiefs preview of the Super Bowl, but Vicki assured me this had to be an overview of the consensus agenda on economic development, so I guess we'll have to wait till later in the program to discuss the Super Bowl. To begin, this morning, I want to start with kind of the what and why of the consensus agenda. So this is not the EDC economic development agenda, and I'm going to attempt to share my screen real quick so you can have reference for what I'm talking about. All right, can everyone see that?
Yes. Yes.
So the consensus agenda on economic development is a representation of priorities across the city, and we ensure that happens by creating a 26-member legislative committee comprised of diverse individuals from economic development stakeholder organizations from across the region. On quick look, I know that Zach Sweets, Vicki Wolgass, Mark Coulter, Sam Panettiere, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a few others that are on this call, were all part of that committee representing their various organizations and viewpoints. And so we really do a great job of going across the city to find out what matters in economic development in Kansas City and putting those together. And so this, again, is not the EDC specific agenda. This is a much larger agenda, and I'll start at the end, and you can kind of see that in addition to those 26 members on the legislative committee, we also have 16, soon to be 17, organizational endorsements, organizations like South KC Chamber coming to say that this is aligned with their priorities and that they endorse the stances that we take. And so what that essentially allows us to do is go to Jefferson City, not as Jim from EDC, but as a city, as kind of a unified front when it comes to economic development. We believe that that creates a lot more clarity for our legislators when they realize that they're not just talking to, one person, one individual, that they're really talking to a group of people that have all come together and found out what this city values when it comes to economic development. And so that is the background of the KC consensus agenda on economic development. Now I'll move into the stances. And before I do that, I'll mention that these are not prioritized. We thought because they fit on one page that it maybe made sense for them to go unprioritized, just so we can approach different legislators and have different discussions. But number one, you'll see internet sales tax. This is simply a Wayfair fix. We view this, like many, as twofold. One, while it's a great source of revenue, the second part of it's more important, and that's leveling the playing field for our brick and mortar businesses. We don't want companies that have invested in the state of Missouri, created jobs in the state of Missouri, to have to be penalized for having that brick and mortar presence. And so we support a Wayfair fix without a corresponding revenue reduction. We think it's important that those two discussions are had separately because this really isn't about a new tax as much as it is about fairness for our existing businesses. If we had 100 people in a community all paying a 5% income tax and we had 10 additional people move into that community, it wouldn't be an additional tax for those 10 new people to pay their fair share of taxes. And so that's kind of how we view this, and why we hope that the Missouri legislature this year can implement a Wayfair fix without a corresponding revenue cut. Number two, you'll see transportation and infrastructure funding. With the failure of Proposition D a year ago, the future of this is a little bit undetermined right now. I know Senator Schatz has a bill that's gaining some notoriety, but we are here to support transportation and infrastructure funding, whatever that may look like. We think it can't be said enough that the state of Missouri has one of the most extensive infrastructure systems and one of the lowest levels of funding. And the quality of the roads are not an indictment on MoDOT or our public service entities. Really, at some point you get what you pay for. And so we really believe the time is ripe for additional transportation and infrastructure funding. Number three, you'll see enabling sidelined workers. This was a series of various stances and previous agendas, and we wanted to kind of put them together and tell the story that for a lot of our lower wage workers across the state of Missouri, it costs a lot of money to work. And it sounds silly, but when you calculate the cost of childcare, I have 2 kids in daycare, I can tell you that is not cheap. When you calculate the cost of owning and operating a vehicle, it makes it very difficult for folks to enter the workforce. I have a good friend who works for a manufacturer in South KC named Sioux Chief, and he tells me all the time that it's very difficult to fill jobs under $15, $17, $20 an hour, and oftentimes it's because the economics do not work out when you talk about all the costs that are associated with working. So we want to see the Missouri legislature continue year after year to make it as easy as possible for folks to get to work. Some of the items that we called out to support that this year were Medicaid expansion, early childhood education, public transportation, training, reskilling, second chance initiatives. We also think it's worth mentioning that the governor has created the Office of Early Childcare, the Office of Early Childhood. And so this is a priority for the governor. And a lot of these items were mentioned in last week's State of the State address. And so we feel very optimistic that a lot of these items will move forward. We know that Medicaid expansion is moving forward. We also know that the budget is probably in a lot better shape today than it was maybe a few months ago, or at least the outlook on the budget is better today than maybe it was a few months ago. And so we look forward to seeing things like Medicaid get implemented without corresponding cuts in things like education and elsewhere. And we hope that the budget will allow for those things to exist in harmony. Number 4, funding entrepreneurship and the Missouri Technology Corporation. First and foremost, when it comes to our current situation, we have replenished about 70, last I checked, 70% of the jobs of pre-COVID. That said, I don't think we've replenished 70% of the wages. I don't think that the jobs are coming back apples to apples. And so it's going to be important that we continue to focus on the economic recovery. And it's easy to overlook entrepreneurship's role in an economic recovery. But the reality is entrepreneurs create businesses, businesses create jobs. And when we look at our economic development efforts, while it's fantastic and a huge win for the KC region to attract a company like the USDA, we also recognize that we're a lot more likely to grow a major organization like a CERN or like a Burns and McDonnell than we are to attract them. And that's nothing against business attraction. It's a fantastic endeavor, but we need to also make certain that we are looking after entrepreneurs as the future of this region and making certain that we do everything that we can to fund entrepreneurs. Part of that is the Missouri Technology Corporation. They have done a fantastic job over the years of supporting Kansas City area entrepreneurs and startups. And for reference, I believe their funding used to be around $17 million a year, and that has been reduced to $1 million over the last few years. And I believe it was even zeroed out last year due to COVID. And so while some of those budget cuts are understandable, it's going to be important as we move forward to prioritize entrepreneurship as part of this economic recovery. Number 5, opposing discriminatory legislation. I think everybody on the call would probably say, well, that's great. We should all oppose discriminatory legislation, but why would this matter on an economic development agenda? I'll tell you, from 5+ years in economic development, several of those years recruiting businesses and working with companies evaluating multiple markets, this is a big one. Companies will not locate in states or cities that have a reputation for supporting discriminatory legislation. I think one public example of this is the NCAA's reaction to so-called bathroom bills a few years back. They made it very clear that they would pull their events out of states that had legislation that they deemed discriminatory. And so this is not going away. I think it is only becoming more and more common for organizations and businesses to take stances on this. And so it's important that we send a message to the outside world and to our existing companies who are thinking of expanding and may have other states that they can expand into. It's important that we send the message that Missouri is not a discriminatory state, that we will not tolerate that kind of legislation, and that we will be forward thinking on that. We're all interested in seeing now Senator Razor's MONA Act and the progression on that as well. Number 6, taxes and economic development tools. This is a lot of words to essentially say that we want to do as much as we can to support local decision making on things like a Kansas City earnings tax, on things like incentives tools. Then we also want the state to retain their existing commitments to Kansas City in the form of funding to things like the Truman Sports Complex, and importantly right now, the Buck O'Neill Bridge, which Governor Parson has called out multiple times over the last few weeks as a continued priority. This isn't to say that we want to increase the level of incentives or anything like that. We simply want local decision making. One prominent example of this last year was the state wanted to regulate how CIDs and TDDs were implemented, requiring a municipal-wide vote. And while that kind of sounds like local control, the effect is that people that weren't part of the tax would be voting in it, and to even get a TDD or a CID on a ballot is prohibitively expensive if you're a smaller CID or TDD. And so effectively it would have eliminated all the small use of the tool, and only would have been available to the largest of projects that had the ability to campaign citywide. And so we have worked with the governor's office and others to have that defeated, and we would continue to do so this year. One positive point on number 6 is the implementation of low-income housing tax credits. That's something that had been eliminated a few years back, and this year was reinstated. It's not a dollar per dollar match. Missouri is committing to 70 cents on the federal dollar for a match, which is a big step forward. Right now, I think everybody realizes that affordable housing is a major issue, and we need every tool to be able to address that issue. Number 7, Missouri works wage thresholds. This is really in 2 parts. The first part was kind of to boost economic recovery. We saw wisdom in temporarily lowering some of those thresholds to achieve the Missouri Works incentives. We're not talking about anything that would infringe on a livable wage discussion or anything like that, but Kansas City's notably lost out on a few distribution center deals in the last few months, and presumably had this wage threshold been lowered a little bit, we could have been more competitive on those. There were certainly other factors at play, and so I don't want to place the blame squarely on the incentive by any means, but we saw wisdom in maybe lowering that as to be reactive to the pandemic's outsized killing of lower wage job opportunities, and we wanted to be able to be more competitive in getting a lot of those back, which is why that stance is there. This was also created in the fall, and the job situation in the state of Missouri looks a lot better than we would have envisioned it did then, and so this may be put on the back burner a little bit, but the second part of this stance is a lot more forward thinking and would be relevant years from now, well past the pandemic, and that's to move to a NAICS standard, which is a very technical way of saying we would no longer use arbitrary average wage thresholds to grade projects, that we would do it industry by industry. And so, you take a job, let's call it $40,000 a year. Well, at an engineering firm, that would be well below market, and that would suppress wages for that industry in the region. While at the same time, if that was given at a distribution center, that would be a fantastic job at a fantastic wage and push up wages in that industry. And so I think as economic developers, it's our goal to always have a little bit of positive wage pressure upwards. And we think this would be more responsive to that and allow Missouri to be competitive in a bigger variety of different industries versus only being competitive for more high wage opportunities. And so other states have moved to this model for that exact reason. And we think that long-term, it would make a lot of sense for the state of Missouri to do the same. We've had initial discussions with the Missouri Department of Economic Development, and one of the bigger issues on this one would simply be logistics. It's not an easy thing to implement, but there was an understanding that there was a lot of wisdom in this stance, and so we will probably have this on here for a few years to come and work with partners across the state to build a coalition to get this done. Number 8, opposing video lottery terminals. This has come up lately with the Gray Machines lawsuits, but we oppose video lottery terminals for a number of reasons. We recognize they're a blighting influence. We recognize that the ability to regulate them, the ability for gambling addicts to access them, the ability for underage folks to use them, that's all problematic. But again, this is an economic development agenda, and Sam Panettiere had brought a study to our attention, to the committee's attention, that suggested as much as 20% of jobs and corresponding revenue had been lost in Illinois when this issue was studied from casinos. And so, we're looking at this from a jobs and revenue standpoint, and we don't think it makes sense for casinos to be regulated at a much higher rate than these lottery terminals would be. And so we are on board with opposing them. Our federal priorities, those are fairly simple, and there's only 3 of them. A lot of our work's at the state level, a lot less is at the federal, but we wanted on number 1 to be prepared for any economic stimulus that could potentially come our way. The last stimulus, I think it was problematic the way it was distributed. Municipalities had to have 500,000 residents to have the money sent directly to them. Kansas City, Missouri was a few thousand short of that, and so no money flowed directly through the city. It flowed through the counties, and it was very disjointed and and how a lot of that money was distributed. And so I know Congressman Cleaver is working hard to get that fixed moving forward. But nonetheless, you're seeing the same news I am, that this discussion's changing a little bit each day, but it does look like it's moving forward, and there will be another economic stimulus, and it'll probably be well north of $1 trillion. And so that will have big ramifications in terms of how it is structured. If there's going to be funds for state and local governments, there's going to be, individual stimulus checks, et cetera. Number two, transportation infrastructure, the elusive federal transportation infrastructure bill. We're continue to be optimistic, but this is now the third administration where we've been optimistic that something would get done large scale to support transportation infrastructure investment and reinvestment. And the last stance we have is really aligning with the Kansas City Area Development Council's push. A few years back, they had worked to create a federal strategy, and that paid immediate dividends when the USDA project came up. And obviously Kansas City won that, but we won that because Kansas City is a fantastic place for federal job opportunities. We have a very qualified workforce at a fraction of the operational costs. And while some of these projects can get politicized, from Kansas City's viewpoint, we certainly, want these opportunities when they come up. And so that's the last priority on the federal agenda. And so that's where we're at with the consensus agenda. Again, I'll reiterate what I said at the beginning. This doesn't come from Jim at the EDC. This comes from a 26-member legislative committee. And we have a lot of stakeholder organizations that have endorsed this. And so, we believe it's a great representation of the region's priorities. And that's how we are framing this when we discuss this with our legislators. So with that, frankly, I would be interested in hearing from our legislators either today or moving forward, where we can work together on a lot of these issues, where our priorities overlap. And with that, I'll pass it back to the hosts, and most importantly, go Chiefs.
That's right. It's Jim, I have to say it's quite impressive. After all that time in the alphabet soup, you somehow managed to hit exactly on the agenda time, 8:25. So that was a great presentation. Thanks for practicing for us. Does anybody have any questions for Jim? I'm trying to look at the chat to see if we have any, but if there is anybody that might have a question for Jim on the Kansas City KCMO consensus agenda on economic development, and please either raise your hand or put it in the chat and we will get to it. But I will pause. All right. I'm not seeing any questions. So Jim, you must have done that great of a job. And of course you did. That's why we had you here today. So we appreciate you going through the agenda. And Jim, can you tell us one more time where we can find this agenda if we're curious in 2-3 days?
I will post it to the Q&A. How about that?
Great.
If I can figure out how to add an attachment.
I also have it if you want to email me as well. So either way.
Perfect. Yeah, we can get you a copy of that. And I can just say that on the back end, that those meetings, just like what we do with the South Kansas City and Grandview Chamber meetings, setting our priorities, a lot of great discussion there, a lot of careful consideration. And I know that there was a lot of talk about what the region needs to move forward. So we appreciate everybody's work. And talking about everybody's work, before we get to the I'm sorry, a question just came in. That's why I paused. We have a question actually from Madeline Romeo. She wants to know what has the highest likelihood of moving early in Jeff City this session. And we'll also kind of toss this to our newest members that we're going to introduce and hear from and maybe get their perspective. But Jim, have you heard, what conversations have you been a part of, or maybe heard back from some of the early movement in Jeff City on what has legs already this early in session?
I think Sam Panettiere may be the best one to answer that. I know that, there's been some concerns with COVID of a start-stop session. And so because of that, the budget is likely to get bumped up and move quicker this year than most years. I know that Senator Hageman has been pushing on a Missouri Works bill that would allow for military projects to go through more seamlessly. But I think I might rely on Sam Panettiere for probably a more thorough answer than that.
All right. Well, Sam, Sammy, I see you on. If you could just throw something in the chat for everybody to see with your perspective, if you have one, and we'll go ahead and move to our next portion. And this is the part that I'm actually really excited about every year. Well, not every year because we don't have new members every year, but every time we do have new members, I love learning about who they are. And so, as I'm sure they're learning in the House, you don't get a lot of time to speak on the floor, maybe a minute and a half. But today we're going to give them all the time they need. So this is their own personal filibuster, if you will. And we'll go ahead and introduce Representative Patty Lewis from the 25th District. I've already seen her on local news outlets talking about some issues. So it seems like she has already jumped right into the fray. Representative Lewis, it's great to see you this morning.
Well, thank you. Good morning, everyone. And can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, first of all, thank South Kansas City and Grandview Chamber for inviting me to introduce myself. Jim, thank you for sharing. I think we are meeting next week. So looking forward to that. If we're doing predictions, I say Chiefs 38 to 24, and we will bring the win back to Kansas City. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Representative Patty Lewis, represent District 25, which the northern boundary is 47th Street and extends south to 435. The west boundary, state line, and goes east to Oaks/Holmes. And I was born and raised here in Kansas City. I actually grew up in South Kansas City. I'm a nurse by background, been in healthcare for over 20 years, worked in ICU critical care, also worked for a healthcare IT company where I traveled all over to improve patient safety with technology. The committees I've been assigned to is Health and Mental Health Policy Committee, Professional Registration and Licensing, Rural Community Development, and yeah, I was on the news last night, which was it's my first time. It was very strange to me. I guess I got to get used to it. But, healthcare is extremely important to me. Earlier in the week, we met with Dr. Williams and the COVID vaccine team with questions and concerns about the slow vaccination process in our state. We are one of the last, if not last, when it comes to vaccination. And they've changed the allocation process. It was confusing, and I'm still confused, and I'm searching for answers. They're claiming that they're treating everyone equal, rural and urban, but that's not what the numbers show. Jackson County residents are 5.4%. This was numbers as of 2 days ago. I didn't look them up yet this morning, but Jackson County residents, 5.4% have received a first dose. And you compare that with Cape Girardeau, it's over 12%. Many of the rural communities are in double digits, and the urban areas are not. We don't have any mass vaccination distribution scheduled in urban areas, which is very disappointing. As far as where to go, my office is inundated with where do I go? It's my turn. As far as my recommendations right now are to call some of the major healthcare systems, Truman Medical Center, St. Luke's, and HCAs. Those are where those sites are going to be receiving most of the vaccinations within our community. So certainly trying to get answers for you all, and I will continue. Other priorities, healthcare, gun violence prevention, equal rights. I did file my first bill, which is House Bill 889. It's a companion bill to Senator Razor's, which modifies provisions relating to insurance coverage with mental health. So ensuring mental health benefits are covered the same as medical and surgical benefits. It hasn't been assigned to a committee yet, so just keep an eye on that. I'm also working on some common sense gun legislation bills, red flag laws, transfer of firearms, and child endangerment. And I'm also working on voting accessibility. Many of the folks have reached out to me. We need to make it easier to vote, not harder, always, not just during a pandemic. So that's something I'm looking into as well. And that's it. I don't know if we're taking questions, or I'll pass it back over to the hosts.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we'll go ahead and do is go to our next representative and just kind of open it up, broadly speaking, and let folks just ask questions of the both of you, or if we have anybody else that is on with us. But so now we'll go to, thank you, Representative Lewis. And by the way, you did great. You did great. You represented the area well on TV. So next we'll turn to Representative Annette Turnbaugh, always when I'm speaking, out of the 37th district. And Representative, it is good to have you. I see you have, is that an official Chiefs jacket that has a yellow on the collar?
This was given to me back in the 80s by Henry Marshall and Gary Barbaro, and it is 35 years old. It's the only thing that survived my house fire because I had it on. So yes, well, it is authentic.
It is good to know that I am older than that jacket.
Yes, yes. I was not as prepared as Patty this morning. The committees I'm on also, Patty and I are both on rural community development, and that was very interesting. Yesterday morning, last week, and our committee meets at 8 o'clock on Thursday mornings. And some things finally got passed on through there pertaining to WIC. Yesterday was the conversation being used for farmers markets. It's kind of an in process still. Also, what came up in conversation that we sent on through 15-0, I might say, in our committee, were the lighting aspects for horse-drawn vehicles. There's been obviously major issues with fatalities in those areas where the communities that have horse-drawn vehicles are. And we've passed on through the fact that we need to have more visibility for those. It's still a conversation in progress with those communities, because obviously it's not the rules that they go by, but the conversation yesterday pertaining to what we sent through on lighting, on reflective materials on the horses, the buggies themselves, is because they are traveling on Missouri state highways. Once they leave their properties, they need to follow the same rules of the road as everyone else does. I'm also on small business, committee for small business. That's been very interesting. And I'm also on, Patty, what's my third one? Oh, conservation and natural resources. And that's been very interesting. There not a lot of things. We've been more kind of successful shooting some things through in rural community development at this point in time, where there's still other things that are a work in progress, shall we say. But it's very interesting. I'm learning there's just so much information and a plethora of emails, as you guys can imagine, from home, constituents, requesting things, trying to find who we need to go to get those answers for, because I've always been of a mind, as those of you guys that know me, that if I don't know the answer to the question, I will search it out. And I've got a few of those things sitting on my desk that I'm in process of getting answers from my constituents. As you guys know, personally, I'm a real estate agent. Haven't been doing much real estate here of late because I've been really sucking all my time into learning. It's exciting. We have really great people, and it would seem, in my opinion, Patty may have her own, but it really seems like there's there obviously will be a separation, but it seems like there's more coming together than there is a separation on several of the things that we have voted on that were of importance. We had votes where it was out of 162, Patty, 162, we'd have 155 votes to move forward an amendment. We'd have 140 votes out of 161. So, which was my hope when I came down. I think we're really doing a good job of building that bridge. I really feel that we're coming together, and I'm hoping that we can wind up getting things accomplished, moving right along, just no stalling other than what we have to deal with, of course, as far as COVID goes, and the situation with that is kind of an unknown. I can't tell. I can't see if Greg's here or not. He can probably speak better to what's going on over in the Senate, because obviously for us, the state of the state, the Senate didn't have a quorum. Ergo, where we would normally have a joint session and have the state of the state in the House, because they lacked a quorum, they chose to have the state of the state over there. Those of us were allowed to stay in our offices and watch it live stream, which I think a good number did. But again, it's a learning experience moving forward. We're getting some things accomplished. It's just piles and piles and piles. And when Representative Runyons told me you will have piles and piles, I didn't think they would land quite so quickly, but it's a hit the ground running. And for those of you that know me, you know I'm pretty good at that. So thank you. And back to you, Zach.
Yeah, I feel like with all this, back to the host and back to you, I feel like I'm sitting at the anchor desk or something. But I will actually, before I'll take a point of personal privilege and ask the two newest representatives before we get to our next presenter here. Just a quick question. What has been most surprising to you thus far in session while getting down to Jeff City? You kind of, Representative Turnbull, you already kind of hinted at it. It's the amount of work that hit your desk so early. Representative Lewis, what has kind of surprised you so far?
Yeah, I'll echo what Annette said. And also just, they refer to us as freshmen, and I feel like a freshman in high school some of the time. The first week on the job, trying to find the parking garage, and find my office. So navigating some of that. I know where my office is now, but yeah, there is so much to learn. I'm so thankful that I've got a seasoned LA in my office, Jill. So she's amazing. She's been in the Capitol for over 20 years. So when you call the office, she's fantastic. But there is, I think, because of, I think it was what Jim had said, that will possibly be in session, out of session because of COVID. Bills are moving very, very fast. And it's a lot to keep track of. We do have amazing staffers that help keep us up to speed, but it is certainly, I've been working 12-hour days at least 6 days a week.
Yeah,
Agreed.
I know that. Oh, go ahead.
No, I agree. And just to add to it, Patty, I too have a great 20-year LA named Paula, and so when you call, you'll get Paula. She's a little gatekeeper, they are little gatekeepers for us. But I will just add to finding our office, was obviously the priority, but finding the shortcuts up to the House floor become very interesting as well,
Yeah, that building is something else. And I know that coffee and staffers keep government moving.
Absolutely.
But with that, we'll go to somebody who I hope already knows where his office is. He's had enough time. Representative Mark Sharp, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks, Zach. Thanks for having me.
Would you threw in the chat that you might have just a little update real quick, and just also kind of give us a quick update from where you sit and where you've kind of landed on committees this year and your outlook as you all have already gotten started down there.
Okay, sure. Real quick, Mark Sharp, South Kansas City, 36th District, Hickman Mills, Red Bridge area. My district lines are basically Bannister Road over the state line all the way down to about 119th, back east to Raytown Road and back up to 435. My office has gotten off to a good start this year. The committees that I'm on were all the committees that I wanted, which was the Elementary and Secondary Education Committee, which is probably my most busiest committee, and I'll talk more about that here in a second. Next would be my General Laws Committee. We hear a lot of gun bills, and I'll talk about that one here in a second. Also, crime prevention, and I was just added to a special committee on urban issues. Robert Vescovo, the speaker, just added me to that to that committee. Right now, the bills that are really moving, I'm not sure if bills are moving any faster than what they normally would, but the kind of bills that are moving early in session is kind of surprising. You wouldn't typically see these kinds of heavy hitter bills so early in the session. Right now, we have House Bill 85 and 310 that are bills that are joint together or being sponsored together. This was just voted out of the House yesterday and is being sent over to the Senate. Ultimately, this bill won't go through because it's unconstitutional, but this bill basically handcuffs law enforcement not to enforce any federal gun laws. And if they did, the department, that law enforcement agency, would be subject to at least a $50,000 fine. So essentially, you have Republicans sponsoring legislation that essentially defunds police, if that's how you want to look at it. So that's one bill that's moving real quick. Second bill is House Bill 729. This bill was heard in the Education Committee. This bill will basically redo education in Missouri, basically opening up the floodgates for charter schools to open up almost anywhere they want to, and a whole array of different packages for ESAs and vouchers. So it really would put public school probably in a tough spot. The two bills that I have referred to committee right now are the Negro Leagues license plate bill, specialty license plate bill in honor of the 100-year anniversary for the Negro Leagues. That bill should be heard in committee in transportation probably in the next week or two after talking with the chair of the transportation committee. So I think that bill will fly through. I've already have support from the entire body on that bill. So that one should get passed this year. Also, I have Blair's Law, which is being referred to committee. To my committee that I'm on for the General Laws Committee. So for those of you who don't know, this is the 10-year anniversary that Blair Shanahan Lane was killed by indiscriminate gunfire or celebratory gunfire on 4th of July in 2011. So I'm actually getting ready to head down to police headquarters now with her mom and Representative Roy Rowland and police officials to urge folks not to shoot when the Chiefs win this Sunday.
Thank you, Representative. And it's always good to see you all on location. You're on your way, and so we appreciate you giving us an update as you're doing the work for your constituents and for the state. And so through in the chat, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A. I don't see any new ones, so I will just really stall for time here and see if there are any questions, maybe from Vicky or Kim. Actually, we do have one question. Can someone speak to the disparity of, and perhaps Representative Lewis, this might go to you since you spoke to this most recently. Can anyone speak to the disparity of vaccines in urban versus rural? Are there indicators that you're seeing that suggest why the distribution is so tilted? I'll just add to that question and say that we saw the tests distribution in Poplar Bluff, and then we saw this week some other distribution sites in Chillicothe and other parts of the state that don't have as dense a population. Can either of you speak to that or have seen any information?
Well, as I said, when we met on Wednesday with the Dr. Williams and the COVID team, their goal is to make it equal, but that's not what's really happening. So I can't speak to why. I hope it's not political. I quite frankly, lives are on the line, and it's very upsetting to me. I don't know the reason, while rules getting mass vaccinations and we're not, I'm still looking for answers, but I can't, really make heads or tails why they have increased percentages versus the urban areas. I will say that from the committee that we met, both urban and rural, they're all feeling forgotten. So we can all agree that the speed isn't where it should be, and everybody is feeling left out. And then I do want to add to Representative Sharp. I sit next to him on the House floor, and I am so lucky to have him next to me. He's always helping me get up to speed on what's going on. So Representative Sharp, thank you for being my desk mate.
No, I'm lucky. Thank you.
It's funny how quickly the freshmen turn into the mentors in Jeff City. So I'm glad that we have a great caucus that works together and looks out for each other. So thank you for that question. It's a great question to ask, very timely and poignant. I'm just looking here and seeing if there is any other questions. At this point in time, oh, okay. I understand the question. One just popped up. Is the attitude more civil? And this is kind of open to whomever would like to jump in. Is the attitude more civil in Jeff City in the State House than what we see in Washington? That's pretty common question, not just for the time now, but just in general when we're looking at where the temperatures are at.
I believe so. Everybody's very amenable. I know with some of these bills that have come up, when there's kind of conversation in between, where I sit, the representatives that are in front of me are on the Republican ticket, and my chairperson mate is Marlene Terry, Representative Terry, and we've got, there are so few Democrats, and so we have the Republicans right there. And what I have found in the time I've been down there, that these gentlemen that are around me, it's all gentlemen that are around Representative Terry and I, are very open and willing to have conversation. And even when we're not in session on the floors, even just around the buildings, it's very civil, at least from my point of view, from what I've had in my time to this point. And conversations, as we've said, we have more in common than we have differences. And if we can just choose to make that work together with some of these bills. Now, obviously, there are going to be some where we are going to be outnumbered. But I think the civility has been very respectful, and Representative Sharp and Lewis can both speak to that as well.
Can I jump in real quick here? Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay. One thing I want to add is it seems like a lot of the new freshmen, especially on the Republican side, have been particularly open to having conversations. Now, I can't say that with some of the more seasoned Republicans that have been there, but I think as Democrats, our image down there is that we're so looked at as not even being open to approaching Republicans. So I think whenever we take the time to go over, introduce ourselves, have a conversation with them. I think that goes such a long way because it's divisive down there. Maybe it was me seeing how it was last year and seeing how things are starting off so divisive this year. Just in the education committee alone, that committee has been loaded up with some of the Republicans' toughest bulldogs of representatives, and they're going after people on the committee. And I hadn't seen this before in my other committees last year, and it is in that committee. So it could be more civil in some areas, but also in some places you have freshman Republicans who have been fairly receptive to the conversation. So it just depends, I guess, how you're looking at it.
And then I'll just add to what the other representative said. Yes, as a freshman, the bipartisan freshman group is very collaborative. There's been several networking events. We didn't have our bus tour because of COVID, but we're really trying to, come together and work. As far as like my health and mental health committee, there's a diverse group of backgrounds from pharmacists and just a wealth of knowledge on both the Republican and Democrat side. And our chair is very fair. He wants everybody to have a voice, which is really exciting.
Well, and I think this next question that we got actually kind of flows very nicely into that conversation of how is the camaraderie? What is the interactions between legislators and the temperature in Jeff City? And my assumption is that this bill, when it gets to the floor, if it hasn't already, will generate quite a bit of conversation. The question that we got is there truth that there is a bill on the floor that would allow people to fire upon peaceful protesters? I don't know that there's truth necessarily to that piece, and maybe, well, absolutely, you all could speak more to that. But I know that there are controversial pieces of legislation that address how one can interact or engage with a peaceful protester. Would either of you, would any of you like to speak to that?
I can field that one if other two don't mind. It hasn't hit the House floor yet, I don't believe. It has been filed by Representative Schnelting. I forgot which district he is out of, but the bill has been filed. Somebody could probably look it up right now and see if it's been voted out of committee or not. But the bill has been filed, and yes, the bill does have language that would allow essentially people to harm protesters with their cars, and there's some other language in there too. But yes, it would generate a ton of controversy if and when it gets voted out of committee, and if it ever hits the floor. But it has been filed for sure.
I just want to thank you. I think I just want to thank all these questions are from one person. So thank you very much for helping us really get to some of these good conversations and some really important 3 questions there. I think we are getting close to being ready to wrap up here. And I know that there is one question from everyone's favorite lobbyists, certainly the Grandview Chamber and the South Kansas City Chamber's favorite lobbyists. And I say favorites as in we're going to group both of them together. We love you both equally. But Jeremy LaFavor asks, are there any issues in the legislature that the legislature has washed their hands of this year? Stuff that they have, that the legislature used to work on that has just lost steam already? And I know for the freshman members, that might be a more difficult question to answer, but if you do have a perspective on that, please feel free to share. But Are there any issues that the legislature in this year, we talked about COVID, we talked about, trying to meet and the priority of budget kind of superseding other things. Are there any issues that the legislature already is kind of thinking, we're just not gonna push forward with this year?
Well, I don't think PDMP has been filed in the House this year. So with Representative or now Senator Rader's absence in the House, prescription drug monitoring has not been filed. Last I checked, that bill is absent in the House. So, and I'm not sure if she's even filing it in the Senate anymore. So that's something that may have just hit a wall. Because I know she was very saddened last year when it didn't cross the finish line. So she may have just dropped it altogether. So I'm not sure. But that's one that would stand out for me, because it was a big bill last year, and a lot of folks thought it would go through, and it never made it there. So, but that's one that I haven't seen or heard of this year.
And Mark or Representative Sharp, I can add some conversations that I've had about that, because I was very interested in it. And Representative Clemens is going to file that bill in a companion bill with the senator. So I don't think that he has filed it yet, but I think he's certainly looking at that. So that's just a conversation we've had in the office. And then, I can't speak to, I guess just to comment about like losing steam, the unconstitutional gun bill that passed out of the House yesterday, it's not deterring me from filing common sense gun legislation. So while I know it may not go anywhere, I'm going to still work for all the priorities that you share with me and that, put me in this position today. So that's not going to deter me from speaking out and keep fighting the good fight.
What's the famous words? And yet she persisted. So
Yes.
we appreciate that.
Yeah. And again, being new, just learning. I haven't filed any bills yet. I have a few things on my list here that I'm looking forward to filing. It's just getting up to speed and completely understanding whereabouts and how to go about doing this. But you guys will see me moving along the way here soon. Again, I figured Mark would have been, or Representative Sharp would have been the one to know, since he has more of a history than those of us freshmen do, because everything right now is new to us. But I look forward to this bill that they're speaking of with the Senator Razor's bill moving forward, because that's very, very important to get that passed through.
And one thing that our other favorite lobbyists, we got to come up with a unified name, for both of them. But Sammy did add is that Senator Holly Reeder has already received a hearing on her PDMP bill, and it was voted out of committee in the Senate. So there is some in the other chamber, some movement already, and look for that to hit the calendar soon. With that, I believe we are coming to a close to this morning, and I just want to thank the three of you and Jim Erickson for joining us. And it was like I said, it's always great to become a little bit more familiar with our elected officials, and a little bit more familiar with the connective tissue that are the priorities of Kansas City, why they matter, and how they translate into growing a better region, a better city, and a better state. And so with that, I will turn it back over to the true leaders of all of this, Kim and Vicki.
Thank you, Zach, and thank you to all of our representatives for joining us today. It was great to get to know everyone a little bit better. Kim, do you have anything you want to share before we wrap up?
No, I just add my thanks to Zach and Jim and our legislators for being with us this morning.
Yes, and thank you, Jim. We had a great overview. That was a great overview of the consensus agenda. Our next legislative breakfast will be March the 5th, a month from today. And look forward to seeing everybody then, and go Chiefs.
Yes, go Chiefs.
Oh, and by the way, happy birthday to Mark. I heard today's his birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you all.
Happy birthday, Mark.
Happy birthday.
Thanks, guys.